Okay, perfect. Next speaker is Fryman with metrics are for chumps.
All right. Hello. All right. Thank you. I added some extra slides this morning. I put the logo down here for OSMC because that's where we're at, and I also added some extra slides here, which are not here because this is the backup laptop. So we're having some fun today. But what the slides basically said before I dig into this, first off, who am I? My name's James Fryman. I'm a security practitioner that got scared to infrastructure. What I mean by that is the better part of my career getting started was spent in IT security. It's actually on the offensive side. And I spent most of my time hacking into systems. Ethically, of course, get permission. And I quite enjoyed that. Quite so much I even have tattoos exclaiming my love for security on my person. Shortly after I got said tattoo, however, my role changed, and I turned into a compliance kind of person. And I found myself spending days checking boxes. We're compliant here, we're compliant here, we're compliant here. The furthest away you could possibly get from buffer overflow, right? I said, I can't do this anymore. So I made a change. And one of those changes was, I'm going to become an IT automation person. I mean, heck, I've been doing this automation stuff for 8 years up to this point. I like coding, I like breaking things, I like automating because guess what? I am a lazy administrator. Does anybody subscribe to the lazy admin school of thought? Good, yes. The less amount of work that you do, the better, right? Because then you can sleep, you can do a bunch of other cool things. Well, anyways, my extra slides in here before I kind of get into my presentation. I'm going to take a moment, digress, because it is my birthday and I'm allowed. This year I ran a conference in Nashville, Tennessee called DevOps Days. And the gentleman who convinced me to do this, standing right there in the back of the room, I naively thought this was going to be easy. Yeah, see, he's laughing, right? It's not, right? I've been speaking on the road for about 5 years now, and I thought, hey, maybe I could just run a conference. No problem, right? I'll just run a conference. It doesn't work that way. These things are hard to put together, very hard. So my birthday wish from all of you. Today, go find an organizer. Give him a hug, give him a handshake, take a picture of it. Hashtag thank an organizer with OSMC. They didn't ask me to do this. I have no relation to NETWAYS. You should. These are awesome. I'm glad we're here. Thank you very much for putting together. So before I get started, just one more round of applause for the guys here. Thank you very much. All right, so let's actually talk about what it is that I'm supposed to do and why I'm here. This is my mission in life, to enable operations staff to sleep. That's all I want to do. And that's, partially borne by a lot of lack of sleep on my own part, right? And empathizing with the human condition that sleep is something we all really like. I don't know about you, but I spend about 1/3 of my life sleeping. And I like that. I like waking up refreshed. I like going to bed. It's something that I enjoy, part of the human condition. Well, once I got from this security position into an operations role, well, that disappeared. It was sort of like having a child, except every night at 3 a.m., it was a phone call instead of somebody crying. And the difference is that at the time I had switched, you can sort of assume that with a small child, they'll mature and they'll start to understand things and they'll time adapt. With an IT organization, you can't make those assumptions, right? No matter how much energy and effort you put into it, sometimes there are things that are stopping you from getting sleep. And sometimes they're the same things over and over and over. And when I realized this has become my mission. It's how do we make the repetitive things go away? Because in my neck of the woods, Nashville, Tennessee, I've spent 3 or 4 years now in the kind of bleeding edge. Everybody's talking about all the cool new tools, get on the Kubernetes and the Dockers, and we got some instrumentation, some monitoring. Man, this bleeding edge is so fun, it's so awesome. And then you go talk to these people in my actual town, and they're 7 to 10 years away from even thinking about that, right? I see some of you laughing, right? Maybe you're in an organization like this, and that's okay. this presentation is geared toward how do you convince those organizations, those teams, those leaders, that they should care about monitoring. They should care about instrumentation. Because I have medical clients, I have large hospital chains, and .NET. That's I guess not a knock on the language, but something that has come from the .NET world very heavily in Nashville is the MSF framework, Microsoft Solutions Framework. And that is very heavily geared toward the wonderful waterfall, which means long projects scattered over long amounts of time with lots of people. It's sort of the antithesis of what we want to try to get done here with DevOps, with instrumentation. So it's a very huge shift, right? And my conversations usually go like this. We set up instrumentation. Oh yeah, cool. That's awesome. What'd you do? We did some vibrato. Maybe we set up some graphite. It was awesome. Yeah, so how did it go? What'd you learn from it? Oh, we tore it out. What? Yeah, we had a problem, and we couldn't really diagnose whether or not it was caused by the time series database. So, instead of trying to keep this thing, we just got rid of it because, we've been doing great so far. We don't need this. It's fine. What? Why? Why? And it's not just, I said insert weird excuse here, because that's just one of them, right? I've heard silly things like, it's too complex, which is a valid criticism. I've heard things like, just don't have time for it. We're going to dig into some of these things here. But usually, this is how it goes in my town. Somebody tried it, then they stopped. And they don't have a good reason why. So why am I doing this? Why am I talking about this? Because I'm selfish. I'm lazy. I'm selfish. I'm human, right? And I like to take advantage of these things. So one of my favorite books is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And one of the things that he says in there is, you have to be selfish to be selfless. So what I want to do is I want to create environments that I want to go work at. That means I have to have these conversations with new friends, with old friends, with everybody, because this is not just, oh, I did a project and now we have instrumentation, right? This is an ongoing process. And in this is adapted toward our Auth0 case, which is where I currently work. I'm going to tell you about what we actually did. So this is interesting. I'm going to talk about the abstract, and then I'll actually give you an example. So when I first started writing this presentation, it was actually very negative. Very negative. It was geared toward all of the excuses that I had ever heard about implementing instrumentation. It was just going to be like an attack deck, a positive attack deck, but something that just talks to you about, well, here are the problems. Well, in the middle of this, while I'm writing this presentation, we actually had a success using the things I'm going to talk about here. So hopefully we'll put a positive twist on it and show you how things can actually get done. All right, so what's the story? We had a customer, came to us at Auth0 and said, we love you guys. Actually, first of all, Auth0, online software as a service, authentication, authorization, 10 minutes away, include a library in your language of choice, and boom, we got it for you. It's cool, not gonna lie. And a big customer came to us, which we actually signed. Very excited about that. I'm bearing the lead here, but it's important. They came to us and said, we like you guys. We like everything about you, but we're big. We're big. Can you handle what kind of load we're going to send to you? Yeah, sure, 3,500 requests per second. That's a respectable number. That's a big number. Okay, so go back, turn around to the team, talk to the CTO. Well, what can we actually do today? About 500 requests per second. Okay, all right, so that's a gap. It's called an exponential gap. How long do we have to do this? 2 weeks. Oh, cool. So we have 2 weeks to apply science. That's a little microscope here, if you can't see it. It's emoji. Some emoji in this. So we have 2 weeks to make this thing work. What do? The first step is Recon, right? Try to understand what has been done up to the point when you enter, right? It's very rare you're going to walk into a greenfield situation. And if you do, God bless you, right? Go make that happen. But 99% of the time, something has been done already. And you got to go find out what has been done. What positive things have happened? What negative things have happened? What has caused them to be where they're currently at with regard to instrumentation? In the case of Auth0, they had already tried this. They went through, implemented Liberato, put it all throughout their metric stack, took the time, then they had an outage, and another outage. And they're at the time where we're in a hyper-growth state, constantly growing. And so they didn't know what to do. This thing, right? We put it in, now we have problems. We're going to take it out. And they did. So they attempted it and then took it out because they didn't understand it very well. They didn't have time to understand it very well, right? They have business demands that are being placed on them. They have customers they're trying to satisfy. They're trying to make enough money to make it to the next day. So I can be upset about this, and that's okay. They can be upset about that, and that's okay. But they had to make a business decision, and understanding that's important. And that'll actually come into play later in the Auth0 story. But make sure you understand what's been done. Do the recon. Why is your company at the current place it currently is? And then make the case. Breathing a lot in this microphone, sorry. Buyin's no joke. I actually really debated putting this slide in because it's so cliche. Oh, you got to get buy-in from the top, or else it won't happen. Well, it's true. It's you have to. I've worked at a company that makes DevOps tools that the CTO was not on board with this, and so it didn't happen. Okay. Everybody's got to be on board. Not one leader, not 2 leaders, not 3 leaders, all your leaders. And they got to know why you're doing this. Right? We're going to talk about some of the reasons that's important to them, right? But everybody's got to be on board with this, or else it's going to get ripped out. So step 1. Step 2, make the case. Recon, make the case. Get your buy-in. And this is the conversation that you need to have. When should it happen? This is always the big question with business people, right? This is the DevOps hierarchy of needs. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, look at this. And it talks about these multiple layers, right? At the very bottom, our foundation, we spent a lot of time talking about this. Acceptance, learning, tolerance, experimentation, right? All these wonderful feel-good things that we talk about that enable all of the other things to occur. However, what ends up happening is everybody's excited to get to this continuous delivery portion. And it's a race to the top. Because if we can just get to continuous delivery, boy, everything will be fine, because right, it's at the top of the triangle. That's where everybody wants to be, self-realized DevOps style. The problem is if you miss these things underway, well, you have a house of cards. So where does monitoring fall in? Step 2, understanding. Understanding of process, appreciation and considering for security, logging, and reporting. You can't get better with improvement if you have no way to measure it. It's part 2. So, some excuses. It's not the most important feature to work on. Except it is the most important feature to work on. How do you measure success otherwise if you don't have some sort of instrumentation, some sort of monitoring? There's a real cool story I was reading the other day about a race car. And they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this race car to make it go faster. And they ended up putting new tires on it. Well, imagine if you built this thing and you went through all this R&D and all this research and you just stuck it on the road and said, it's faster now. Who would accept that? But we do it all the time. All the time. We just, that's better. It's faster now. Let's go. That's difficult. How do you actually tell whether you're successful? That's where you get into feelings and emotions and who's buddy up with who in the company. That's not how I want to run. That's not how I want to work. I want to have data-driven conversations. You can't have that without data. So, when somebody says, what's the most important feature to work on? You say, it's the most important feature to work on so we know whether the other features are working well. Whether our users are using them. Whether our Yeah, whether our users are using them, whether they're running performant, tons of things. You have to know, you have to measure. We can't start until we understand the data retention requirements. Yeah, I heard a chuckle over here. That one's happened, right? This is a common pushback from security and operations teams. Because, you know, if we start collecting the data, well, now we have to save it for 7 years. We have to. Most of the time you don't. Most of the time you don't. The data we're talking about here doesn't have PII, doesn't have healthcare data associated with it, doesn't have credit cards. It's numbers. Numbers. And so when somebody comes to you, you can say, no, I'm sorry, that's a premature optimization. We don't even have it yet. We have no idea how much we're going to collect, because you don't usually when you're implementing this thing. You have no idea what your ingestion rate's going to be. And often you throw too much at it to begin with. Well, if you're experimenting and then you throw this common block in front of you, well, you're never going to get started. Because, you know, how do you save data for 7 years? And most of the time, companies haven't solved that one either. Yeah, go figure. It's a premature optimization, right? Fight it. We don't run a SaaS. This is my favorite one. I hear this all the time. All this cool DevOps stuff that you guys are doing, oh, that's just for websites and stuff. We're an enterprise, or we build on-prem software, or whatever. We're not a SaaS, so it's different for us. It doesn't matter. Well, that's goofy too, right? Like, why? I don't understand that. And it's especially prevalent with on-premise software. And that's super confusing to me, because guess what? Let's say you release some software into the wild, and then inevitably, it will happen, you'll get a phone call that it broke. Because nothing's perfect, so it will fall over. Not when, if, or not if, when. And if you have no way to measure it, how are you going to know if what they're telling you is right or not? Right? You're not going to have anything but he said, she said, whether your appliance is running properly or not. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to win because they're giving you money. Right? If you've got no way to defend yourself, the best you've got is customer service. And that's okay. But it's not. It's okay in the sense that we understand why people think like this, but the mindset's got to change, right? These are common practices that you can do regardless of whether you're in a SaaS, regardless of whether you're running on-prem software, right? Make it available. Know what happens after you ship a feature. Know what your uptake, your performance. Even if you're on-prem, even if you're in enterprise with only servicing your internal customers, it matters. It matters. You know, we've made good decisions up to this point, so we don't need monitoring. Our gut has got us this far, it'll get us further. This is a link to an article that basically talks about how most people in IT have never participated in a successful project. Ever. And it even talks about a high percentage, a little less than 20%, but still very high, that these projects are fatal. Not just they fail, they kill the company. That's a significant amount of mind blow there. And so when somebody says, hey, you know, we've made good decisions up to this point, you can sort of, you know, backtrack it with the decision talks that we made up to this point, and also say, you know, you need to make decisions based on knowledge, not intuition or luck. That will only get you so far. Entropy is only on your side for so long, right? Chaos theory only works so often. How then are you going to take advantages you can get and leverage them to your benefit, right? It's hard enough to run a business. It's hard enough to know what your customers are going to want and how to grow. But if you're just going by your gut the whole time, somebody who's got data is going to come and overtake you pretty quickly. I promise. Happens every time. You got to align your incentives. I like to align my incentives with something that matters to me. Sleep. I like to sleep. I like my staff to sleep. I like my friends to sleep. Now, business leaders, they don't want to hear, hey, I just want to go to bed, right? They want to hear other things like, how's my feature doing? How's my response time and my page loading going? What's my cost per unit or per transaction? This is the language that they work in and that they care about. What about the language that we care about? Decreasing MTTR, mean time to restore, mean time to respond. Finding bottlenecks in your system and fixing problems before they become them, or understanding seasonality for capacity planning. Let's put sleep in front of all of these, and it will work. I want to sleep more, and that I will sleep more by decreasing my mean time to restore and respond. I will sleep more by finding bottlenecks before they become problems. I will sleep more, understanding the seasonality for my capacity planning. You, sir or madam, whoever your boss is, you will sleep more because you'll know your features being tracked, right? You will sleep more because we will know how people are consuming it, and well, you'll sleep better because you know how your money's being spent. Sleep's fundamental. I'm not going to lie about that. I'm going to keep coming back to this. But align your incentives, right? Find a language that matters to both you and your leaders. Really, you just got to put developers on call. Quick show of hands. Who works in an organization that has developers on call? That is a sad state of affairs, ladies and gentlemen. Because, you know, that DevOps wall, there's a wall here. It's an imaginary wall, right? That DevOps wall, and they throw stuff over, and then who's responsible for it, right? Not the developers. YOLO, they shipped, it's fine, I'm out. Ops turn. YOLO, hashtag YOLO. This is hard, right? Because, you know, usually you have to have some sort of authority or power to do this, or influence, to say, hey, we need developers be on call. But here's the thing. There's a new model that's been arising for the last, you know, let's call it 10 or 15 years, called the site reliability engineer, right? That person, that role, can be on-prem, can be off-prem, can be whatever. But their goal is to be the sort of bridge between the people who don't want to do operations and the people who don't want to do development. Yeah, it sounds like DevOps, right? I think SRE is sort of the closest job title toward what DevOps could be or should be, or a good example of what we've got at this point. But the SRE requires having understanding about how to code, right? Has understanding about, you know, hey, when something breaks, I'm not going to spend another 3, 5, 10 minutes to call somebody who could fix this, right? I have knowledge about how to read stack traces. I have knowledge about how to push code. I have knowledge about how to fix the thing, right? So not everybody's there yet. Not everybody needs site reliability engineers, but everybody needs developers to be around, right? And to be on call. Because guess what? Developers, they like sleep too. Go figure, right? And the second you put somebody who has the ability to code in front of a problem that interrupts their sleep, guess what will happen? They will fix it, thank you, right? So this is sort of you can look at this a couple ways, right? The first way is you need partners. You need to make sure that you have cooperation with more than just your operations staff, right? Availability is a team sport. But it can also be looked at as, you know, if you don't know how to code or you don't know how to operate, you don't know how to read stack traces, that might be something you want to get good at, right? This is where it's going, right? Is not trying to find ways for big, large teams, because availability suddenly matters all the time, right? 99.99, that's sort of a standard, and that's 18, 24 minutes of downtime a month. Then you throw another 9 on there, oh my gosh, right? You need to have people who can respond and understand the core dumps that come out of this thing, not just your operators who are going around going, hope I can keep some infrastructure up, right? It's non-ideal. You can get by with it, a lot of people do, but have the real conversation with your leaders. Put developers on call. You'll be amazed at what happens. Be amazed. And you have to be opportunistic, right? So this is the slide that got added as my presentation turned from super salty angry to, oh my gosh, success, yay. Success is often planning, 90% of planning. And then you have to incorporate that timing and luck factor into it, right? Finding opportunities where accelerating efforts associated with key components are moved up. So in the Auth0 case, right, they knew they wanted metrics. They tried once. They didn't have success, but they knew they wanted it. And we were in the middle of planning it. It was sort of my second month at the company at the time, so still getting my hands about, you know, what's going on here, right? What is this system actually doing? And we're putting together a plan. Here's what's going to take to put instrumentation in different parts of the system. Well, then our big challenge came. Hey, you know, increase your speed, your performance by a factor of 10. Cool. Well, guess what? We had a plan. was already sort of built. It wasn't fleshed out completely, but it was an idea. And so when the opportunity came and it needed to happen, well, holy cow, now you're prepared, right? And that's exactly what happened here, is we went to and say, okay, we had this big challenge, how are we going to do it? And we're sort of on the path already, not officially, but on the way. Boom, throw down that plan. 2 weeks, right? Be opportunistic. Find the things that you care about in your company, right? Put together small little, I don't know, thought balloons, small documents, whatever sort of gets your company's minds working, right? And be prepared to have the conversations, because there will be a point when something that you care about, like metrics and instrumentation, comes up and will be necessary, and you can just go and be the person, be the man, be the woman. Then you got to pick your tool set. And this is where it starts to get fuzzy, right? And there's a couple approaches to this in-house and SaaS. I mean, that's sort of self-explanatory at this point in the world, right? But this is where you lose people a lot, right? Because it's difficult to unlearn. It's difficult to understand. There's so many moving parts to this thing, right? Who's put together an instrumentation stack? It could be a tick stack, a graphite stack. 1, 2. Okay. Who would say it was the most pleasant thing they ever did? Oh, okay, cool. Who would say it was not the most pleasant thing that they did? Okay, it's an even split. Masochists are over here. No. The challenge is when you have a stressed team, a stressed operations team, a stressed development team, a stressed anything, and you say, hey, I'm going to add something. It could be anything, and it could make their life better. They're immediately going to reject it. I've got too much things going on to learn a new thing. I can't plan for this. I don't even know how it's going to work, right? It's sort of the fear of adding more burden to the operations staff, right? And that's understandable. There's a lot going on, but you got to be prepared about how to attack it, right? So on the in-house side, it does get confusing. I'm not going to lie about this, but resource costs matter, right? One of the decisions that we made about this is how long it was going to take for us to actually get a monitoring stack up and running. In our case, we only had 2 weeks, right? Putting this up in 2 weeks, or actually less than 2 weeks, so that we could actually spend the time doing the analysis, that's pretty tough, right? Because you've got to pick some amount of gatherers, and you could use one or many, depending on your state. You could use one or many listeners, one or many backends, one or many renderers, and this is just some of the tools. It's not even the full space. And so when you ask somebody like, how do you get data from your system all the way to presentation, right? It's difficult, right? It's hard. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of money to be made in fixing this if you have an opportunity, but it's a valid pushback, right? Which is where you get the SaaS solution, right? Somebody has done something for you, throw money at the problem. In return, they'll give you advancements. Maybe that advancement is the dashboard or the collection agent or pre-made graphs or any number of things, right? This is sort of where you have to manage people time, right? In the case of, a full-time in-house solution, you often need a person working on this, a full person, all the time. Not just to, keep it up and running, but to, make sure that there's somebody there to help with ingestion and help with renders. There's a lot of bootstrap associated with that. Versus a SaaS solution, often that bootstrap time is significantly cut. It doesn't solve the how do I leverage instrumentation problem, but it does solve the how do I get started problem. And this is the path that we chose ultimately at Auth0. We only had 2 weeks, right? Which means we had days, really, less than days, to figure out what our stack was, and then some amount of days remaining, 2 weeks minus n days, to actually do a performance analysis. So we went with Datadog. We went with Datadog because it was the furthest along the path for us. It gave us the collection agents, it gave us the dashboards. It basically made it so that you could put something in front of somebody who's never seen instrumentation and go, there's some data. They may not know what they're looking at yet, but it shows up very quickly, very easily. Now, we also designed this because cost matters. This is expensive, right? And that's the sort of trade-off, right? You're throwing money for some amount of risk taken off of you. And in the case of Datadog, it actually represents 1/3 of our OpEx cost for operations a month. That's a lot. And that's after negotiation. But that was an acceptable business risk for us at that time, right? We didn't have time to dilly-dally. But what it allowed us to do is say, all right, we have to sign for a year, have to, right, in order to get a decent rate that we can reasonably be okay with. In that year, we're going to learn a lot about our instrumentation stack. We're going to learn a lot about our system. We're going to learn a lot about a lot of things. And we ultimately want to fall back to this, right? We want to bring it back in-house. Because, you know, who owns your availability? Me, right? Or you, depending on who's asking the question. This guy, 2 thumbs, owns availability. So we actually built a shim layer before we released this to our development staff that basically abstracted the logging, the monitoring, the metrics, called the auth0 instrumentation library. And all it did was, you know, hey, here's a thin wrapper, and now it's available using all our common conventions that developers can consume, right? Great, very important, right? Make it frictionless, make it easy for people to consume. But it's also designed in such a way that at some point we can go, we're done with this, right? Our 12 months has elapsed. We don't want to pay 1/3 of our OpEx costs anymore. Let's bring it in-house. And as far as the developers are concerned, nothing changes, right? Because all of the calls that have been assigned, the send data here, log thing here, it's already abstracted in our small shim, right? It took about a day and a half to put together, but it was worth the effort. Because now we can change things underneath the hood, and the developer knows none of the difference, right? Yeah, I think I talked about this already, right? The analytics portion is where you get more than just the logging, right? Librano gives you the, hey, I've got a place to put it. But, you know, these tools, Datadog, New Relic, App Dynamics, there's more. They'll give you the more. I installed the Nginx plugin. What's it doing now? Oh, here's my requests. I installed the HA proxy plugin. Here's what's happening there. I installed the Docker plugin, et cetera, right? You get some amount of basic analysis out of the box. Enough that you can start the troubleshooting. Not enough where you can get full understanding. You don't just put New Relic in and then everything's fancy and fine, right? You get some visibility. And then you got to go tweak and tune, right? So this is what we ultimately picked in the end, right? And I'll talk about why. We talked about the cost of the solutions, the tech debt tax, 1/3 of the cost OpEx for Datadog. Worth it, trade-off to begin with, but not long-term. The monitoring stack we talked about with we have Datadog and our own homegrown tool, and this is actually being phased out pure for Datadog, right? Logging, we already had a Kinesis Kibana pipeline that was set up, and Sentry is an exception handling tool that we introduced in order to get some visibility into the things we didn't know about, right? All of these are wrapped. All of these are wrapped in a thing called the auth0 instrumentation library that sends it to these different things. And so we can swap out the backend as we wish, Now we chose a couple of these, right? We talked about Datadog is that it has a statsd connector, dog statsd. So you can sort of already begin to use the same conventions that you would normally do in-house, and it's just a swap out, right? There's a big reason we chose Datadog over, say, like App Dynamics or New Relic. We chose Sentry for the exception handling. I know there's a couple of those. I do have a slight bias. I know the guy who founded it, he worked at GitHub, so I kind of know it's going to be a good product. But they also offer an on-prem solution. And so following the same line of reasoning that we ultimately want to bring this back in-house, well, we chose Sentry. Because at some point we can just put the on-prem version up, repoint where the target is, and now we've got it in-house, right? Maybe grandiose thinking, but we're going down this path and it's still working well for us. And you have to iterate, right? This is the hardest thing, because most companies nowadays operate in the very day, week, month, project-based. We're done. We implemented metrics. It's wonderful. It's fantastic. We can go do something else now. And that's not how it works with this, right? You have to constantly iterate. You have to constantly take measurement of what's going on because you're constantly making changes, right? But in the same vein, right, you don't boil the ocean, you make small iterative changes. As you learn small things about new feature X or old feature Y, you make small adjustments. And you see, with your monitoring, what the changes are. And this is where the PDCA cycle comes through. Plan, do, check, act. Right? It's totally fine if you're trying to implement this and a feedback loop doesn't exist yet. Most places it won't, right? Because you reach the finish line and then we're off to the races with something new. But the first implementation is very much a first hammer. I don't know if, I don't want to repeat my hammer story. Who's heard my hammer story? Okay, good, all right. So hammers, right? I have a colleague who has a blacksmith friend. And he went over one day and said, hey, I want to make something. I said, great, we're going to make a hammer. So they sat down at the thing, they spent some time, and they made a hammer. And my buddy was like, awesome, I'm going to go make something now. I said, no, we're going to make a hammer. Well, what do you mean? I got this hammer here. I said, no, that's the hammer we're going to use to make the hammer. Oh, okay. So they take the first hammer, this very rudimentary one, this first hammer, and they use that one to make a second one. My buddy's like, okay, great, fantastic. Let's go do something. Let's go make something. No, we're making a hammer. Take the second hammer and you build the thing that you ultimately want, the hammer that gets used to go and build other things, right? You don't just start out with a hammer, you have to iterate. And so when you look at this, look at it as your first hammer. This is the thing that will give you the ability to grow, right? It has to be your first cycle, and you have to know you're going into more. You have to know that you're going to come out with a better hammer out of this, right? Your leaders need to know this. Your teams need to know this. Whatever you do, spend time learning about deployment friction and spend cycles there, right? Because any time that you run into friction associated with this, you're going to get pushback. That's the first thing to attack, the detractors, any sort of friction. Because if you can't get past that, then you can't have higher order conversations about what is my instrumentation and monitoring actually doing, right? So, phase one, bootstrap phase. Here's what we did at auth 0. We programmatically built our test environment. We measured key control points, and we tested testing prepared and data flowing to key points. I did really bad with those points. I'm very sorry. The general phase is we created a new environment. We implemented our tooling. We tried to figure out where it is that data actually kind of would get blocked, would get stopped up, right? And for us, that was, oh, actually, I'm going to not go into that quite yet. Let me go into the phases. So, find your choke points, measure at key points, and then start to do tests. The second phase for us was iteration, right? Do testing, run till exhaustion, find your choke points, build dashboards, speed up. And then the third place is ability to dynamically add resources to each component, figure out what your actual KPIs are, iterate, test time, right? Go do your thing. So let's talk about this in the auth 0 world. We built a test environment. We threw Datadog everywhere. And then we said, where are the places where things would traditionally fall apart? And that would be, okay, I lost a slide on my new deck. Mongo, handoff, right? Database hands off. Middle tier handoff, right? Somewhere where one system starts to talk to another. Those are common control points, right? Test to see whether what you expect coming out, going into the next system, is the same. The same volume, frequency, requests, whatever the thing you're measuring is, right? And we also started to actually create, with the basic dashboards, where was it that we wanted to measure? For us, it was capturing requests per second, right? So, maybe something different for you, but requests per second for us is, mostly the front end, right? And then, is my HA proxy tier, is it giving the amount of requests that I expect, right? So we have a baseline that we want to have coming in, and you want to see at each point where does it tail off. Let me see if I got actually talking about this. No. Well, let's just skip ahead. Where can things go still wrong, right? Let's say you've done all this cool stuff and you've implemented it. Some of the things you're going to get is, what we have is good enough, right? Logging is often cited as being good enough. If I have logging, it's just fine. I don't need any more instrumentation. Well, this assumes a couple things, right? It assumes that, number one, you have the ability to find a needle in a haystack, right? That is an amazing skill, and if you have the ability to do that, please, I would like to talk to you afterwards. But you need some sort of telemetry to actually narrow down events from your system, right? At some point, some event occurs. How are you going to narrow down to it the time frame that it occurred in order to actually go and find out what the logging information is? It also assumes that you've done due diligence to make sure that everything's logged. And I guarantee you that is a false statement, right? There is something that will not log that will cause a problem in your environment. So you can never say logging is enough. Like if you go back to our stack, right? This stack includes 4 pieces, right? Instrumentation about how things are going. Status about whether things are up or down. Information on issues as they're occurred. And then all of the rest of everything else, the unknown unknowns, right? The 4 dimensions here we're capturing, not just one, not just logging. And this actually took a lot of discussion about, because logging will get you a long way. It really will, right? You can go a long way digging through logs and trying to find seasonality through the mountain of log events that you possibly can. Our engineers were really good at it, but they were really good at confirmation bias, where they sort of came up with a theory and then used the logs to explain it, as opposed to finding actual data and digging in and reproducing and going forward, right? It's okay that, if you're at this point, right? Again, understand these are like evolutions, these are growth patterns. But you need to make the case that having one thing is not enough. You need more visibility. The second thing, you got to keep in sync with the developers, right? We actually had some failures here. Change is difficult. And even with the most well-intentioned people, you will encounter resistance, right? With us, everybody's really excited about doing this. In fact, there were 2 factions. Let me kind of back up. There was one faction of folks that had been around for the first implementation that were very negative on the whole experience. We implemented Librado. It caused failures before. Literally, I was asked, what makes you think it's going to work this time? Okay, well, that's a very harsh criticism, but let's see what can happen. In that case, I basically had to say, you got to kind of trust me. And that's not an answer that developers always want to hear, right? What they want to hear is, how are you going to be there for them when things go down, right? In our case, we put Datadog in. We got instant availability and visibility. But then it was, well, how do I interpret this? How do I add measurement points to my system? What are these measurement points? What's the difference between, a counter and a histogram and any of the other kind of pieces? Well, we were so busy with other things going on, we sort of neglected this part. And it almost fell apart just because of this. Because the developers lost confidence. We've only got 2 weeks. We have this big client in front of us, and I don't feel comfortable. And that's tough. It's tough to hear because we're trying to introduce data into this, and now we're talking about feelings. But you have to hear the people that you're working with. Why are they giving you pushback? Where is that coming from? I understand, internalize it, and act on it quickly, or else the detractors are going to become problems for you, right? As the people with influence go, this is not working, I'm out, right? Once you lose the 1 or 2 people on your team that like, hey, if this person accepts or denies, it's going to go, right? You want to, I'm very customer focused in the sense that you want to have teammates and you want to have people that you're excited to work with, that you can make sure that they're successful. So make sure you're paying attention. Make sure you're paying attention. The success of the project lies in the buy-off from everybody. You get the acceptance from the top, you get the acceptance from the bottom. Everybody's got to be in. And this is where we ran into problems, right? The data interpretation was just bad. We had a resource dedicated to it, but for one reason or another, we just weren't able to allocate time with him with the right people. What ended up helping us and saving us was, in the end, actually, I'll kind of detract a little bit. We started to lose confidence in our developers. And they went and started to try to figure out if they could create their own tooling, right? Using AB or something else to get some instrumentation. And that's okay, right? You want competition for your stack. You want to know whether you can learn something from them or they can learn something from you. And after a couple days, they were able to get some visibility and some confidence in data point just because they had built it, but it still didn't match up with all of the other data points from everywhere else. And this is important, right? Because it won't in the beginning. In the beginning, you won't have any idea what is going on, right? You have to sort of make a decision about what cardinal point 0 is going to be and iterate on that. Not try to, make your tools align or fix themselves, but make a decision. This is now 0 point. We want to increase from 0 to n, whether n is more transactions, more performant data, whatever, and then iterate as you refine, as you get to your third hammer, right? And the other thing is troubleshooting methodology is largely unknown. This sort of surprises me, but not, right? When we're constantly being pushed to feature, there's not a lot of time to spend in learning troubleshooting methodology, right? Which is why having the developers on call is often a hard kind of discussion to have, right? Well, how do I make features if I don't have, if my developers are on call? Well, this is sort of where you can kind of come in. When I got started with IT ops, one of the things that I was recommended to do was learn the OSI model, right? It has a lot to do with networking. You can sort of take the layers and model it to other parts of the system to dig through things, right? It's not the best, it's not the worst, but it provides some sort of framework for you to have common language and teachings with people, right? If your team doesn't know how to troubleshoot, right, get your ops team together and sort of figure out if you can put words around it. What does it mean to troubleshoot your stack? When it fails, what do you care about? And show these things to your developers so that not only can they see the data, they can see how things are happening, but when they touch it, the data changes. That's empowering, makes them feel good. That's what you want, right? They're the consumers of this tool ultimately, unless you're also a developer, right? You also have to build out an overview of the system. Even if it's ugly, horrible, rudimentary, but you got to understand how the data's flowing. Like I said at the time, I was 2 months into the job. I was still trying to figure out, who all's in the company, let alone what the system is doing to, our hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And it took about a half a day to kind of corral people to, put up a straw man. Here's where I think data is flowing from the front end, through the middle tier, back to the back end, and back around. Because these are the choke points you want to figure out, right? At each of these choke points, what's happening? And having this data flow gives you common language now to talk to other people, right? Many people on your team are only going to have visibility or scope into very narrow parts of their stack. Whether it's 1 or 2 features or 3 or 4 features, very few folks have the complete picture. And unless you have the complete picture, it's hard to figure out where am I actually going to put instrumentation and monitoring. So do yourself a favor. Make yourself data flows if you don't have them. Work on them, collaborate on them, because those will give you the touch points. Here's where you care about measuring, right? For us, the load balancer, Nginx, the application itself, which had multiple pieces, the authentication pipeline, as well as our applications that sort of support it. Webtask.io is our function as a service, which we abstracted from our core code, and bcrypt as a service, right? So we actually have a side bcrypt service that does hashing for us. Each of these handoffs take time, cost, right? And then obviously there's a database in there. Some data's got to go somewhere. Each of these are potential places where you have to put some instrumentation and some monitoring. And take your baseline measurement, right? Agree on your common test. Don't spend time bike shedding here on ideal baselines. Just throw a stick in the mud and start measuring. Cardinal point 0, cardinal point 0. This is it. We're going to go upwards from here. Not some imaginary point, here. Right? And here could be your baseline of 500 requests per second. Here could be, a normal, CPU analysis. Figure out what your here is. Isolate each component and test individually. So here's an example for us, right? Like cliffs usually denote some sort of bottleneck, right? Some sort of top end that a system can handle, whether it's I/O, whether it's CPU, whatever. And in our system, they sort of prop themselves up. These look like beautiful cliffs here. There's something going on. In each of our subsystems, right? So you can sort of go backwards. If you know the data flow and you see it in multiple places, well, you have to go to the furthest part up, right? If you only see it in one or two places, well, then you can start to eliminate parts of your stack. This is where you start to leverage your data flow. And then obviously you got to fix and repair stuff. So here's what actually happened at the auth0 case, right? Here's how we won. Database was having some problems, and we found out that Mongo was basically Mongo. And the nmap engine sort of only optimizes to put documents in memory if they're constantly being used, right? In our case, we're only using about 20 to 30% of the whole data set, and that would stay in memory and cache. And then most of the rest of the data set would be flushed, even though the system itself had more RAM than the entire size of the data set. We could have just hot-loaded it into RAM. And in fact, we even tried to a couple times, and it would just dump it. No, I'm good. We're good with that. It didn't get accessed within n cycles, so get out. So we ended up moving to WireTiger, which is a new storage engine in the 3 series. And it's got a little cool knob. And the knob says, put more in RAM. We turned it up. And that turned out a 3x increase in requests per second. That's awesome, right? That's a lot. I lead with the infrastructure piece because this is where the blame usually starts, right? And that's okay, right? What you're trying to do is not necessarily defend your area. You're trying to prove or disprove hypotheses. And in this case, we did find that the Mongo layer actually caused problems. Well, great. Let's remove it as a variable and see what happens. We got 3x. Now what? We're not at 10x. So something obviously else is missing. And then you can have conversations with people. We've done infrastructure tuning now. We've done CPU tuning, we've done whatever, because a developer doesn't want to hear that their app is slow. They don't, right? But at some point you need to be able to show them, not only with data, but also with actions on your part to show, here's how I'm keeping my house clean, right? Cool. So we got Mongo. Well, we also found in the web task layer, the handoff that was happening there did not handle HTTP keep alives at all, which means every connection that was going to it was doing a full setup and tear down. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of energy. And so after some refactoring of a couple days, the web task layer ended up going to 11,000 requests per second, right? That was after finding that we had a purposeful bottleneck at the web task layer. We were able to isolate it to there and go, hey man, what can you do? And he went and looked at it and found this 11,000 requests per second. Now this is not the full stack, but this is a piece of the stack now that is no longer encumbered by our top end of 10,000, which is where we want to be. Good. This is now no longer a variable too. And the last bit, we found a slow running method in our authentication code. This is sort of our God method, if you will, right? Every company sort of has one of these when they get started. It's where everybody puts everything until they figure out they don't need it anymore. Well, we got to that point, and we tried to do some refactoring. Mikado style, hey, we're going to try some things, and after about 2 days, they basically declared tire fire. This is not fixable in our timeline. But with experience that we've had over the past 2 years, we now know what our customers actually expect from this endpoint. Right? We have innate knowledge about how it's consumed and how our customer is going to consume it. So let's refactor. So they spent another 2 days working on actually rewriting that piece, specifically for the new method that was being called, and got rid of a lot of legacy code. And that helped out tremendously. And then obviously you find memory leaks everywhere. These are great. Right? These are easy wins. Where you see memory exhaustion, just go figure out why, right? There's plenty of ways to dig into that. And so we started with 5,000 requests per second, and after all of this work, we had something like 10,500 requests per second. And we were able to celebrate with the Raptor Jesus. And I don't care who you are, that is awesome. Factor of 10 in 2 weeks. It's an atypical story, but it's possible. Right? And that's the point I'm trying to make. Is that you're not always going to have a circumstance where 2 weeks of time is going to come drop into your lap, but you got to be prepared. You got to be ready. You got to instrument early, often. You got to kind of figure out what you need to measure. If you don't know what to measure, blast radius, right? Always get more and then narrow down. Align your incentives. I like sleep. You like sleep, I like money, you like money. There's tons of communication mechanisms that can be used here. Figure out the incentives that the team that you're working on, the bosses that you're working with, what do they care about? Use those things. Align your incentives. You got to jump in. Don't block. Don't hesitate. Do it. Get in. Iterate. Listen. You have to. The team that you're working with, they're going to make or break this. You're not building this tool for you. You're building it for them. So what do they have to say? Why do they hate it or love it? Listen. And the call to arms to people in this room, right, is to leave things better than you found it, right? Most of the people, all of you are here because you're involved in monitoring, you're learning more about monitoring, you're trying to do these types of things, or you're doing these types of things in your organization, right? Leave things better than you found it. Because the person that's going to come after you will either curse your name or praise your name. And, I'd like them to say, I'm glad that so-and-so left instrumentation and monitoring. It's really made my job better. Because then I'll want to go work there. I want to attract people that want to work there, right? Leave things better than you found it. Quick special thanks. This is the team that helped put it together at Auth0, Jose, Leo, Tomek, Seba, Sandrino, and Woloski. They spent a lot of time with us and the team kind of actually working through application performance, right, as we help them with the infrastructure piece. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. I'm Jay Fryman everywhere on the internet. You can also email me if that's your thing, but I appreciate your time. Should I do questions? We got time?
Okay, just in time, but we one or two short questions.
I actually took the whole hour. That surprised me. I'm sorry.
No more questions? Okay, here's one.
At one point in your presentation, you talk about that you have to speak with the people and tell them, we need to do this and this and this. And sometimes you have to tell them the things that they don't like. Yeah, especially when you're telling them, maybe it's your performance of your application which is not so good, or maybe we need to do this or some other things.
Right.
How do you tell people which you want to involve that they actually have to do something what they don't like? That's a difficult part in monitoring and increasing performance of applications.
Yeah, good question. So somebody's going to come to you and you have to tell them an unnecessary truth for them, that their app is non-ideal for the case that's going on, right? I am a big fan of data, right? It's sort of like the concept of this. If you're at the point where you don't have instrumentation and you have these discussions, there's not really much you can do other than try to make really persuasive arguments. And if you're going toe-to-toe with a developer who wrote that application, I promise you, you're probably going to lose unless you're the SRE maintaining it, in which case you might actually have an edge on that person. But more times than not, you don't, right? So, I sort of kind of drive toward there are a couple ways to approach it. I've had to guerrilla attack implementing instrumentation before where you don't have buy-in. And what that usually means is sort of like Skunkworks putting up some instrumentation where you can then say, all right, I know you don't want to hear this, but check this out. And now you're not having a conversation about them or their app. You're showing them data, and you can have conversations aligned with the data. And so maybe you do like RRD tool or something else that can give you some amount of like, something's going on here, I don't know what it is. And if that should give you some amount of like ability to go have conversations with other leaders. And then that's where you start to align incentives. Like I recognize that, if we could release faster or if we had more performant, we could get more requests, which turns into more money. Like appeal to people's greed in a sense, because your greed is I want to sleep. Their greed is I want money. Align the incentives. So keep it data focused. Guerrilla where you can if you have to, but always try to point to data so it's not personal.
One more. I'm actually in that point. I want to measure more. I need logs. For example, I'm working for government, and we're pretty slow in implementing new things. So we just talking the whole time. I think I will actually do this, implement something, show them something, and tell them, hey, yeah, with this we can make some improvements, and now we have to decide to use it.
You have to break the gridlock somehow. I believe that meetings are an excuse to defer, in truth. Like, I'm not a fan of meetings, right? Go and do stuff. And sometimes that means, going above and beyond and getting the data to have that conversation that gets you out of that roadblock, right? So, have meetings as you need to, but, figure out how you can overcome. Is there one over here, or do we got time? Are we out?
Really
one more?
short, please.
One more, real short. I will also be sharing my gin at tonight's event for my birthday, so if you want to come and talk more about this, I definitely will be there.
So buy-in from the top, have you had any spectacular failure, or maybe if not, then what was the hardest case for you?
Yeah, I have had spectacular failures. That's a good question. The good news is that things that you're usually good at, you failed at many, many times, right? And in this case, I'll give an example without naming names, but I had a CEO who was really, I guess, wanted to do instrumentation. He wanted to know how his app was working. He wanted to know how it worked. And the CTO did not, because, it wasn't the most important feature or whatnot. And I probably spent weeks and weeks trying to make the argument that, hey, this is important, this is important. And I failed. We never got instrumentation and monitoring into that tool. And I'm still not happy about it to this day. And I think it was because, fundamentally, the Maslow's hierarchy of need as applies to DevOps, that's sort of like, that's the focal point of the conversation when you're having business leader conversations. Because, besides money, there's not a real clear path to how to do this stuff yet. And if you sort of outline to them the levels of maturity and show them that what they're striving for is up here, when they haven't solved problems down here, these graphics and things like this make impact to business leaders because they only have 2-3 minutes to give a crap about whatever it is that you're talking about before they got to go to the next thing. So, have sort of like ways to share why monitoring comes at this point. And this right here, this graphic has been the most powerful for me after that point. So I highly recommend it. All right, that's it for me. Thank you again. Appreciate it.